Anyone can do a murder, but to make a murder look like a suicide takes an artist, and we have plenty of artists. Those were the words of the head of the Soviet Secret Services, Felix Dzerzhinski. He built one of his best and most deadly espionage centers in Paris in the 1920s. And in 1932, one of the richest men in the world walked into his Paris hotel room. He never came out. If he had survived, the rise of Hitler may have been forestalled, and the Holocaust and the Second World War would not have occurred. But his death was presumed to be a suicide, until 30 years later, when another intriguing, compelling theory began to emerge: murder. Welcome to Crime Waves. Paris, March 1932. Two men die unexpectedly. One was the French politician Aristide Briand. He had won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years earlier for a deal signed with the Weimar Republic, the democratic German state. When Briand passed away with almost no warning from a suspected heart attack, all of France mourned. There was a state funeral, and hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of Paris to witness his burial. At exactly the same day in Paris, another powerful person died unexpectedly. One of the richest men in the world, Ivar Kreuger, a Swedish billionaire. He was the lender of last resort for the Weimar Republic. Many of the big financial institutions in New York and London were massive supporters of an up-and-coming German politician named Adolf Hitler. Kreuger, however, had lent Hitler's rivals tens of millions of dollars, and he was due to travel to Berlin the very next day to lend them more money. He didn't go, and the democratic regime collapsed, paving the way for the rise of Hitler. For decades, Ivar Kreuger's death was presumed a suicide. Then his brother came out with a book, The Truth at Last. He said his brother had been murdered, and he pointed out a number of seemingly important details, such as the hand which purportedly held the gun had a missing finger, which would have made the shooting impossible. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Crime Waves. On this episode, we examine the death of Ivar Kreuger, and the student producers for this episode are the brilliant Justina Skeljardik and Angie Paulus. If you find you like this episode, please take a moment and rate, review, subscribe, or on whatever podcast platform you use. It's massively important and helps us a great deal. And the music that we've chosen that acts as bridges in the interview comes from that year, 1931-32. And we chose it as it would have been the songs that the protagonist of this almost forgotten but fascinating, important case would have been listening to. Our guest is Swedish historian and author Thomas Blom. He's written best-selling books on Napoleon Bonaparte, Peter the Great, and Ivar Kreuger. And we began our conversation by discussing the official story of Kreuger's death. But before we begin, we're going to be discussing a lot about suicide. So if you are thinking of self-harm, please don't. Wherever you're listening or watching, please reach out. There are many people that you can speak to. The number for help here in the United States is 988. That's 988. In the UK, the number for the Samaritans is 116-123. 116-123. And wherever you're listening or watching, remember, reach out. There are a lot of people that you can speak to.
Well, the official version is that Kreuger simply decided to kill himself. So he didn't tell anybody about it, of course, and he acted very normally. He was supposed to be at a meeting at another hotel at 11 o'clock. His housekeeper asked him, "Do you want any lunch?" I'm not sure, he said. And then she went out to shop, and then he went into his bedroom and according to the official version, laid down on the bed, unbuttoned his waistcoat, took a newly bought gun, a large Browning 9mm, in his left hand, lying on his back on the bed. And with that heavy gun, he managed to shoot himself exactly in the heart. And then he put the gun by his side, still holding it, which, well, that's the official version. And then he was found dead a few hours later by his close associates.
Let's get down into this story, because Ivar Kreuger, even now, some 92 years after his death, is still a shadow, is still a large ghost over many, many things in our world. But strangely, he's almost been forgotten.
Well, he was born in Jönköping, a rather mid-sized Swedish town, and from a family who was, I believe he was fourth or fifth generation after they came to Sweden from Germany, which they did early in the 18th century. And his father was quite wealthy. He owned a couple of match factories, and he had some other business interests as well. And the family seemed to have prospered decently. Ivar was the oldest child, and he went to school like anybody else, boy at that time. And there are conflicting versions of whether his school success depended on him cheating or not. There still is a lot of discussions about that. But he managed to finish school, and then he went to a technical education and eventually became a civil engineer, which
And
was...
that's when it gets really interesting, because there's a famous book just coming out a few years ago from Sweden called The 100-Year-Old Man Who Walked Out the Window.
Okay.
And you think that character must have come from, the author's imagination. But I read it. Now I've seen the stuff on Ivar Kreuger. I'm thinking, hang on, that's Ivar Kreuger's life. Because he fought in South Africa. He was a mining engineer in Canada. Tell us a little bit about those wild escapades of his early years.
He went to America with $100 in his pocket, and he was very fascinated by that country. During his first visit to the US, he worked for a real estate salesman, and that it didn't go very well. So then he went to Veracruz in Mexico to work on building a bridge, and he actually got the yellow fever. There were 14 engineers traveling, 13 of them died, and he survived and came back. During his second visit in the US, that's where he learned about reinforcing concrete, which later on would be a very important part of his career. But after this visit to the US, he decided to go to South Africa with a friend, a Norwegian friend. And there's a photo of Kreuger in the Transvaal uniform, but he never enrolled in the militia. And then he spent some time in South Africa investing money in gold and doing some hunting. And then for some reason he went to India. It seems as if he didn't really know where he was heading in life, and he tried to experiment with different careers and different places in the world.
So he returns to Stockholm, still a young man. He's been to India, he's been to Canada, South Africa, Mexico, United States. He's had all these adventures and misadventures. And then something clicks. And in the next few years, he transforms himself into one of Sweden's great industrial giants. Tell us that story, please.
Well, what he did in Stockholm to begin with was to establish himself as a builder. And since he had learned a lot about reinforcing concrete, which was a method that wasn't used in Sweden by that time, he introduced it very successfully. And during a number of years, his firm called Kreuger and Toll, they were mainly a building company. Among other things, they constructed the great stadium building in Stockholm, and they also laid the ground for the city hall. And not least important, they built the house where the cinema Röda Kvarn was established. And after having done a very successful job in building and constructing and making a lot of money, he returned to the matchmaking industry because his brother, Torsten, he had followed in their father's footsteps and gone into matchmaking. Ivar Kreuger started out by simply taking on and expanding the family match business until it became a serious competitor to the largest Swedish matchmakers, Jönköping's Tändsticks, Jönköping Vulkan, it was called. And eventually, this was during the First World War, where there were difficulties exporting matches to England, and that made it difficult for his competitors to survive. And Kreuger eventually suggested a merger. So he managed to fuse his own company with this competitor and started a completely new company, Swedish Match. And also, since the merger, Kreuger controlled all matchmaking companies in Sweden.
Thomas, let's take a step back, because I think for young people, particularly my students listening, they're thinking, matches, buddy, like, what is this? Like the Stone Age?
Okay.
Why were matches important at that time?
Because this was long before electricity was introduced worldwide. So if you wanted to get warm, if you wanted to wash in hot water, if you wanted to cook your food, you had to have matches. Everybody had to have matches. And not least if you had gotten into the habit of smoking cigarettes, you definitely needed matches. So the whole world needed matches, and a single match is very, very cheap. I mean, if you put 40 or 50 matches in a box, nobody counts them, whether it's 40 or 50. So you could easily take out 10 matches and take the same price.
But the genius of Kreuger was not in building empires. It was understanding that if he had a control, if he built a monopoly of something that everybody needed, he was going to make money like Croesus.
Exactly. I think that if you look at his slight excursion into his mind, I think that he looked upon himself as a builder, not as a business tycoon. He looked upon himself as someone who's trying to construct something for the future.
Ivar Kreuger was not a guy you wanted to cross in a business negotiation. He was going to do almost anything to make sure that he got that Swedish monopoly on matches. But then in the early 20s, he goes to America again. Tell us about that.
Well, the thing is that by that time, he may have been harboring his grand plan, because this is after the First World War, when many, many European countries are being devastated. They are poor, they don't have the funds to rebuild, and they are in desperate need of money, but they still make matches. So Kreuger goes to the US because that's where the money is. During the 20s, America wasn't involved in the war in the same way as Europe. There is atmosphere of joy.
Kreuger has a genius plan. He's going to get the money from the American investors, as you say, in that gay 1920s, that happy 1920s. Then he's going to go to France, Germany, Italy, all these indebted European nations after the First World War and say, we'll give you money, you give us the monopoly for matches in your country. No one else but us can sell a match in your country. This is a necessity of it. He also invented a whole bunch of other things, I note. B shares. He went to Liechtenstein and basically offshored his taxes, which is a strategy, sadly, that most US corporations now do. Tell us about some of those things.
The main loan giver to Europe was JP Morgan, but he charged some 8% in interest, and Kreuger offered 5 or 6% in interest. But he actually, by some very smart transaction, he managed to say, I'm loaning you $100. But what he did was he gave them $93.6, and the difference ended up in his cash. He also, in order to keep control over his company, but he had to raise much more money, and he had to do emissions. But in order to keep control, he invented two kinds of shares, A and B shares, as you said. And the B share is just 1,000th of one vote when it comes to deciding the company's future. And it gives no influence over the company, but it guarantees you money. But the A stock makes it possible for you to vote and decide the future of the company. But there were a lot more B shares than A shares.
He's gradually getting wealthier and wealthier. He's building up not only a business empire of a monopoly of a staple, matches at that time, he's also loaning money to these massive countries. So it's essentially a geopolitical business empire that he's constructing at the time. A little bit about Ivar Kreuger's personality, because he's quite, to quote Churchill, he's a riddle wrapped in an enigma, covered up in an envelope of crypticness.
People say that he was a quiet sort of man, but he could, when he wanted, to be very charming and seem to know everything about a lot of things. And the thing is that he also planned his private life. He planned the way he was supposed to impress people. So he could, when he knew that I'm going to meet these people, I want them to think that I'm a very smart and interesting person. And then he sort of zoomed in on a certain subject, read up on it. It could be like almost whatever.
Hungarian finances.
Not only finances, but sort of literature. He read a lot. And he would think, well, I'm going to meet these people, and then I'm trying to make the conversation enter that subject, and then they will know that, oh, this guy knows a lot about things, because he steered the conversation to something that he really did know a lot about. And
tell us about the phone.
Well, he had on his office in Stockholm, he had 3 different phones. One of them was a very early example of a speaker phone constructed by L.M. Ericsson, probably the first in the world, so he could sort of let other people in the room hear what was being said on the other line, because in those days the telephones was quite early, so you have to sort of hold something very tight to your ear. And then he had another phone which went directly to his secretary. And then he had a third phone that wasn't open for any incoming calls, but he could make it ring by pressing a button somewhere in hiding. Bzz. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, hello, Mussolini, or something like that.
So he would fake these conversations on the phone with famous people.
Yes. Now some very, very famous is calling me up. And I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave, because that was also a way to sort of finish unwelcome conversations with guests.
He had a series of women who, in the terminology of the 1920s, he played piano with.
one of them actually did play piano, Ingeborg Ebert, who was quite a close relation for a number of years. She lived very close to him in Stockholm, I think, on top of his flat. And he visited her sometimes, and she said that, I know that he has a lot of others, but I don't care, because he never did marry, of course, and he never had a sort of a very steady relationship. He had a number of different woman friends all over the world, actually. And Ingeborg Ebert, she actually did play the piano. And when he had finalized his most daring business deal with Germany, just about the time of the great stock market crash, he called her up and asked her, please, Ingeborg, play the piano for me on the phone. And she did, and cooled him down.
I want to be alone.
I shall probably be quite alone.
One of his conquests, if that's the right word, I don't think it is. Discoveries is a better word. Was he went to a Stockholm department store, and he saw a beautiful young teenage girl, and he brought her into his movie making empire.
Yes.
That woman, of course, went on to be Greta Garbo,
Yes.
the Marilyn Monroe of her age. Tell us a little bit about their relationship.
Some say they were close friends. Some say they had a love relationship, and neither of them wanted to sort of get married and settle down. They both had their careers to think about. But what we do know is that she often visited him. He had this he had this house on a island in the archipelago, where he took her on his very fast motor cruiser, and they also stayed in touch during his whole life.
Even when she was a big Hollywood star.
Yes,
I read
yes.
somewhere that they were both, although they're both, one's a massively successful rich businessman, the other one's the sex symbol of her time. And they're talking about the loneliness at the heart of their souls.
Quand je l'ai connu, j'ai bien compris, c'était un homme trop à la cool. Mais il y avait pas, le cœur était pris. J'étais comme folle, j'étais comme fool.
But this man has built up a business and geopolitical empire. Let's go through all the different forces and people who had an interest or would have a motivation for killing him. The first one, which surprised me, was Stalin, the communist leader. Why would Stalin have wanted Kreuger dead?
Because Kreuger's the enormous amounts of money that Kreuger sort of pumped into those European countries that were sadly damaged by the war, they sort of functioned like a private Marshall aid, like after the Second World War.
The Marshall Plan.
The Marshall Plan, yes. And that also guaranteed that the communist interests wouldn't be as strong as they would have been if there had been a general poverty and desolation in those countries. So Stalin, of course, wanted communism everywhere in the world, and maybe we know that he saw Kreuger as a threat to that, but he reputedly said that we have to do something about that man.
Stalin certainly had a reputation about doing something, in those words, to many people. And Paris was really a hot spot of Soviet intelligence at that time. Much better than any of the Western intelligence agencies. And indeed, arguably up until the late 60s, the Soviets were the masters of intelligence. There was a great quote, again, my student producer, Justina, had found, where the architect of Soviet intelligence said, anyone, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially, the quote is, anyone can do a murder, but to make a murder look like a suicide takes an artist.
Of course.
And we have plenty of artists.
Yes, that's a good quotation.
So the Soviets are there in Paris. They've got an extraordinarily good, station headquarters of their intelligence service there. There's also the other Swedish business rivals. Tell us about some of that their possible motivations.
The Wallenberg family was very influential in Sweden. And of course, since Kreuger very quickly during the 30s started to buy up large Swedish corporations and making them into very profitable ventures, it was something of a threat to the Wallenbergs. But I can't really believe that that family would directly order Kreuger murdered. That's way beyond me.
Yeah, and particularly when we know that Raoul Wallenberg, the famous fellow who helped so many Jews escape the concentration camp, comes from that family.
Yes.
However, there is no doubt when all things were over at the end of the estate division that the Wallenbergs and other Swedish families did actually very well out of his death.
Oh yeah, oh yes, but doesn't mean that definitely doesn't mean that they had him killed.
Absolutely not. But we've got Stalin, business rivals in Sweden, but we don't believe that.
Another competitor that has been speculated about is J.P. Morgan, or Jack Morgan, as J.P. was gone since a long time, but his son Jack ran that empire. And Kreuger had really managed to break their possibilities in Europe by offering his loans at a lower interest rate. But on the other hand, just right before his death, Kreuger owed some $11 million to IT&T, which was sort of affiliated with the Morgans. So I don't think that you kill someone who owes you $11 million.
I take your point. I also take the point that banking in those days was a particularly dangerous situation. Outside of the Morgan Bank headquarters in 1920, there'd been a shrapnel bomb that had blown up and killed more than 30 people there. Adolf Hitler and the rising Reich in Germany, there was a deal just after Kreuger's death that he was to go to Berlin and effectively save the Weimar Republic, which is the Republic of Germany before Hitler.
But there is another party that might very well have been involved in this possible murder, and that's a consortium of people who speculated in Kreuger stocks. It's called blanking. Do you use that word? In
English now, it's called shorting. You're shorting the market, exactly. And you're trying to drive the price of the shares down.
And the only way for them to cash in on that scam was to get hold of the actual documents. They are numbered. And Kreuger had foreseen that. So he had gotten hold of all those shares, number of shares, and I don't know where he kept them, but there must have been almost a room full of documents, because in those days, before internet, before computers, you had to have the very printed papers in order to claim your ownership of a share. And then he knew that if this consortium came back to him and wanted to claim their profit, he could simply raise the price of his shares and sort of reveal their scam.
So we reviewed the possible people or agents who had a reason, a motivation for seeing Kreuger dead or would profit from him. That includes Stalin. Paris was a center for his intelligence. We've got a Swedish conglomerates, not saying that they did. They had a gain of this, a Paris group of shorters in the Kreuger stocks and companies, quite unscrupulous at their time. Hitler, Mussolini, a number of Anglo-American banks that were propping up Hitler and Mussolini, not something that is generally known now. So a whole bunch of actually really powerful enemies who gained if Kreuger was to die. But for 30 years after, his death is simply assumed to be a suicide.
Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. Everyone is saying you don't love me. Say it isn't so.
But in 1965, his younger brother, Torsten, comes out with a book, The Truth at Last. which talks about his brother's death actually being a murder. Tell us, Thomas, some of the reasons why Torsten believed his brother had been killed. What were the clues that led him to this belief?
To begin with, his brother's death was immediately considered suicide because his secretary, who went to the police, said, "My boss has committed suicide." And the police officer who conducted, it wasn't an investigation, it was just a checkup. He didn't believe otherwise. And there was no formal inquest, and there definitely was no autopsy. In the document from the police checkup, he wrote about the way he found Kreuger. He was lying on the bed with this bloodied dirt by powder marks in a small hole on the left side of his breast, and with his left hand beside him where the guns also was to be found. The thing is that this gun is quite heavy, and lying on your back with the left hand, it's quite difficult to get exactly in your heart, and you have to use your index finger to pull the trigger. And since his childhood, Kreuger's left index finger was badly damaged. The top of it was cut off, and it was also stiff. He couldn't bend it.
So the gun is found in Kreuger's left hand.
Yes.
But Kreuger's index finger, the one that presumably would have pulled the trigger,
and Kreuger is right-handed. So that's a very interesting circumstance. And I don't know if Torsten Kreuger ever had a chance to examine the gun, but I sort of realized, I've read that somebody looked at the gun and said that there was no bullet in the ready for firing, because that was an automatic. And if you pull the trigger, a new bullet directly comes out. There was the bullet to be fired. So that means that someone must have sort of dealt with the gun so that taken out that bullet, because it was empty. And that must have happened after Kreuger's death.
And also, there was something strange about the, quote, letter he left. People had always assumed it was a suicide note. Tell us what was, quote, wrong with that letter.
Well, to begin with, it was addressed to his friend and co-worker Littorin, and it was in English. And there was no reason for them to communicate otherwise than in Swedish, especially not when you write a letter that is supposed to be so important. It was written on a typewriter, and it was signed IK, not Ivar or Kreuger as usually signed, and it wasn't signed by hand. And there were a couple of other letters too, and they are vanished. They are supposed to be in English too. One of them to his sister, who didn't really know English. And so it seems plausible that someone has prepared those letters to make it look like they were written by Ivar himself, and then killed him.
His body. So the Paris police were busy with a massive state funeral of a prominent French politician. They really didn't pay very much attention, as you're saying. His body and his papers come back to Sweden quite quickly. What happens to them?
3 suitcases with Kreuger's private papers were delivered by his secretary and brought back. They were sealed by the Swedish embassy and then taken by his secretary and brought back to Sweden. And the day after they arrived, 2 lawyers who worked for the State Commission arrived at Kreuger's office and simply commanded the secretary to open the suitcases, and then they went through them, and nobody really knows what happens to those papers. There was a very short list of what has been found, but it was never signed and it wasn't complete. So a lot of material that Kreuger had owned and saved for future reasons it just vanished. and we don't know why or how.
And then the body, what happens to the body?
Well, his family and the Swedish government, they wanted an autopsy, and the doctor that got a chance to see the body before the autopsy, he said, "This is not suicide, this is murder." And that is something that Kreuger's sister says. She was present at the time. So we only have her word for it. But the autopsy was supposed to be done at 6 in the morning on the day after. But the doctor who were to perform it got a note from the governor, you could say, of Stockholm, Nils Edén, said there will be no autopsy. I forbid it. And exactly why, we don't know. It's said that Mr. Edén earlier in the day had been visited by two very prominent men. We don't know who. So there was no autopsy. The body was cremated and buried.
So we can ascribe all kinds of secret meetings to all kinds of secret people, but the fact is there was no autopsy.
Exactly.
The fact is that in 2000, his niece, who was 22 years old at the time, she comes forward at 90 years old with a prominent Swedish journalist and says in an open press conference, "I was in a crypt in Paris with three other people, one who's a doctor, and they looked at my uncle. And the doctor immediately said, this is not a suicide, this is a murder."
Exactly. Also, there are also some speculations around how that murder could have been committed, because it was a very small hole in his shirt and there was no exit wound. If you shoot at that close range with a 9mm Browning, there's going to be a big hole. And the thing is that it's very likely that Kreuger was stabbed with a thin, sharp blade, and then somebody fired a loose shot just to give this impression of powder stains and stuff like that around what in reality was a stab wound. But that's a long time ago. The body's gone. We'll never know.
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there.
So to sum up, one of the suicide notes is typed, not handwritten. It's in the language of English, which between two Swedes seems ridiculous for such a painful, emotional note. It's not signed in the way that Kreuger would have signed it. It's in the wrong hand. The gun is in the wrong hand. Presumably the trigger finger of that hand isn't even there. It's been cut off. And there was never a proper autopsy. And many of his personal papers, diaries, affidavits, other stuff has gone missing. So there's all kinds of mystery around it. Your book is specifically on the, quote, Kreuger crash that happened afterwards. Tell us about your main finding.
What did happen after his death was that the Swedish government was very stressed, because he was a great national hero, more or less, but he remained so up until quite after his death. But there was a state commission, a royal commission established quite quickly. And the strange thing about that was the way it was put together, because there were no members from any of Kreuger's companies, because supposedly they should know at least something about the financial position and the amounts of cash, etc. But they were not allowed to take part in that commission that consisted of Kreuger's creditors, mainly people from the Swedish banks that had loaned him lots and lots of money, and now they wanted to get some of it back anyway. So they hired accountants from Price Waterhouse, accountants that didn't know Swedish, and they worked very quickly, and they very quickly established the fact that Kreuger and Toll and Swedish Match and all Kreuger's companies, they are bankrupt. It didn't take them long to establish that. And that meant that a lot of people lost a lot of money. And then the Swedish opinion about Kreuger turned 180 degrees. From having been regarded as a national hero, a fantastic businessman, and somebody who saved a lot of people by loaning money to those poor countries, he became a crook overnight almost, because when they realized that he also was accused after his death of forgery, because when they went through his papers, they found a number of Italian bonds that was supposedly used in order to claim that Kreuger had loaned Italy an enormous amount of money in order to gain his match monopoly.
I did my own research onto this, and I tracked down something in 1933 that Fortune magazine had done, and they said the Price Waterhouse accountants went to Dulce Mussolini,
Yes.
the Italian dictator at the time, and said, "Are these your bonds? Did you sign them?" And Mussolini said, "No."
Of
And
course.
so they said, "Well, they must be forgery." Look, somebody showed up at my house saying, "By the way, do you owe $45 million to the Swedish estate?" I'd say no. That
Yes, of
seems
course.
reasonable to
Yes.
me. Listen, we're running short of time. Thank you for your time. Thomas, tusen tack.
Thank you. It's very funny. It's very, very special. There you are, many miles away, and here we are talking like this. Imagine what it would have been like in Kreuger's day if that would have been possible.
It's literally another universe to hear him taking ships across the ocean and everything.
Yes.
Thank you again,
Thank
Thomas.
you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Declan on behalf of Justina Skeljardik and Angie Paulus, the student producers for this episode of Crime Waves. Thank you so much for listening to It Takes an Artist, The Life and Strange Death of Ivar Kreuger. Now, if you like the show, please take a moment and rate, review, subscribe, or just like us on whatever podcast platform you use. It's massively important and helps us a great deal. And if you like the program or actually thought we made a mistake in any way, do please comment. We read all your notes and take them extremely seriously. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Crime Waves.